Assalamu alaikum, everybody. And before we get started, I was wondering if anyone can lend me a copy of the book because it's so popular that I wasn't able to get one. But I have read it. Yes, you'll get it signed for your trouble. So, welcome to all of you to the launch of The Prisoner, which is probably Pakistan's first crime novel written in English, contemporary crime novel. And it's very exciting for us to have with us the author Omar Shahid Hamid, who flew in just on Thursday morning from the UK to be here for the festival. Omar Shahid is a very unusual person. He is the only person that I know serving on the police force, because when you live in Pakistan, you're taught to fear the police and stay as far away from them as possible. But Omar is not that kind of policeman. He is every bit as much a gentleman as he is an officer, if I can use that terrible cliche. I don't have his biography in front of me, so I can't give you all the details, but he's probably one of the most educated police officers that we have in Pakistan today. He has a master's in criminal law from the UK, is that correct? And has punctuated his time serving in the police with breaks away in the United Kingdom to further his education. He has also spent time working for the Intelligence Bureau, which is also a very scary organization for most of us who live here. But we have nothing to fear from Omar. The most frightening thing about him, I think, is that he tells the truth. And that's not something that we have much of in Pakistan today. So can we have a round of applause for Omar Shahid Hamid? Now, I have a bit of a technological problem because I had all my questions on this iPad and there's no Wi-Fi. So I'm going to have to read them from my phone. So bear with me. Now, just to give you a quick recap about what The Prisoner is about. This is a thriller. And when I say thriller, I mean it is really a thriller. It's thrilling from the first page to the last. For those of you who haven't read it, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But it hinges on the story in contemporary Pakistan, so I guess set in about 2008 or so?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
About the kidnapping in Karachi of an American journalist and the race against time that the authorities have to undertake to free him from his kidnappers. The American is vanished. He's kidnapped outside of Okra in Zamzama by unknown gunmen, and he vanishes without a trace. Yes, those of you who dine at Okra, you have something to think about.
I hope the Okra guys don't sue me for that.
I think it'll make the restaurant more popular, actually. This is the place where the American was kidnapped. And, you know, when I read that, I immediately thought of the case of Daniel Pearl, who was a journalist kidnapped from Karachi in about 2001, I think it was, or 2002?
2002, January 2002.
How much of that case informed the novel?
I think, obviously, Daniel Pearl's kidnapping was a huge event when we look at the sort of global jihadi perspective. It was a huge event from the point of view of law enforcement in Pakistan. It was really the point when the war on terror came home. But I haven't really expanded upon the details of that case. I use the kidnapping of an American journalist as a hook to sort of work on the rest of the book. So that's why I think the similarities between the cases end at the fact that it's an American journalist and he's kidnapped in Karachi.
Were you at all involved in the case of Daniel Pearl? Were you in the police at that time?
No, in fact, I joined shortly after. I was at the police academy at the time, and I joined as an under-training ASP about 6 months after Pearl. But obviously, because it had been such a huge event, its resonance was still there.
Did you do thinking about if you had been working on the case, what would you have done? Or was that talked about in the police afterwards?
Yeah, I think if you talk to people who have worked on the case, and there are some of them in the audience as well, If we are to be very honest with ourselves, it was a case where perhaps as police officers we could have done a lot of things differently. It was a case where in certain cases circumstances governed what the investigators could or could not have done. More interestingly, it was a case where the aftermath of it, so fine, Daniel Pearl was not, the police was not able to recover him, but how we undertook the investigation subsequently, what we could have and could not have done, I think if we were really fair with ourselves, I think there's quite a bit of introspection that we could do as to how we could have worked that better.
So are you saying that hasn't been done? It hasn't been actually looked at and examined?
I mean, it hasn't. I would say we may have done it amongst ourselves as individuals, but I don't think that we ever really did it on a departmental level. I think
a case study.
Yeah, I think we allowed a lot of the mistakes that were made in the case, in the investigation, to stand.
Which leads me to sort of the start of the prepared questions that I have for you. And now, when you wrote The Prisoner, as I read it, it seemed to me that it was almost kind of like a catharsis for you. You seemed to be unburdening a lot of things that had been going on in your mind. Why did you choose to go with writing a novel as opposed to, say, your memoirs of working with the police? Why did you write fiction instead of nonfiction?
I don't have enough to get a really, really good lawyer. I think it is, you're right, it was very cathartic. But in terms of being a memoir, I think the book, while a lot of the instances in the book are based on events that happened, not all of those events necessarily happened to me. There were events, there were stories that when I joined the police, we would tell each other, as officers, कि ये इस तरह हुआ, ये फलाना केस उस तरह हुआ. A lot of the time frame that I mentioned in the book, I wasn't even in the force at the time. So I think for me, the most interesting thing became that the police as an institution has a lot of stories to tell. They are stories which, when you hear them, they are more fantastic than the best sort of crime thriller or fiction writing that anyone could write. But there is no way to connect. And I think that also on the issue of the police, I think if people or a wider audience was able to get an insight into that world, perhaps they could also understand better the problems and the tribulations that the police faces or police officers face as a whole. So I think my whole thing was to somehow make that connection, because it was a world, we are a very closeted world. Outsiders would never be able to hear these stories. And most of us as police officers would not have the time or inclination to write those stories.
And this is why I think that you were probably the person born to really write this book, because, as you said...
Just dumb luck.
There aren't many people in the police who are actually taking up writing. Is that something you'd always dreamed about doing? If I weren't a police officer, I would be a writer.
No, never thought about it.
So how did the book come to pass in your mind?
As I said, it became a cathartic exercise, which then just snowballed into the form it took.
Is this the first thing you've ever written, your first book or your first...
Yes.
And you've never written anything before this? That's remarkable.
I wrote some English compositions in class 8, and it all went downhill after that.
It's remarkable, really, to produce a piece of fiction that is so compelling, and I'm not getting a cut for anything that I'm saying today. This is really a compelling piece of fiction. And for a debut novel, it's stunning. It truly is. And one of the things that you do so well is that you have the reader hooked from the first page. I mean, Omar says he doesn't want to do any reading, so I'm going to do it for him. But I'm just going to read you
You'll have to find a session that's heavily edited, because one of the complaints of the book is the language.
Well, yes, if any of you have read this book, I can warn you that it's R-rated and X-rated in some parts. But maybe that's part of its appeal. We'll get to that a little later. So I'm going to read you just the first 3 paragraphs so you get a sense of how magnetic the writing is and how thrilling, and really the word is hook, because when I read this, I was hooked from the word go. Day 1, 21st December, 6:58 a.m., outside the front gate of Karachi's Central Prison. A cool breeze blew across the front courtyard of the prison, causing the solitary figure to shudder. The gentle rays of the winter morning sun were breaking through the early mist. The weather was chilly by Karachi standards, although it couldn't have been colder than a particularly crisp November day in London or New York. The balmy climate of the city was such that Karachiites only bothered to take out their sweaters and shawls barely for about 15 days in a year. This year, however, had been different. A cold snap had hit the city and lasted for most of the month. Temperatures had been the lowest in recorded history. The man at the gate coughed and stamped his feet. Having been a lifelong resident of the city, he was totally unprepared for the wintry weather. He was a tall man, and his muscular legs had the bearing of an athlete's. He wore a khaki and gray police uniform with the badge of the elite police group on his right breast, certifying that he had been a police commando at one time. But his expanding girth and the way his service belt nestled under his paunch underlined the fact that his athletic days now lay in the distant past. Just below the badge was a black nameplate with the name Constantine etched upon it. Despite his slipping physical form, he was a man who still took pride in the smartness of his uniform. The khaki pants were starched stiff, the tan-colored boots polished like mirrors, and his ink blue beret fell perfectly on his clipped hair. The shiny silver crescent star that he wore on each shoulder stated his rank as a superintendent, but the lettering next to his rank said prisons instead of police. The only personal touch to his uniform was the small gold cross that he wore around his neck. Bloody Fojis, he swore under his breath. Trust an army officer to schedule a meeting first thing in the morning. Constantine de Souza was definitely not a morning person. Most cops aren't. A policeman usually never leaves the police station before 3 or 4 a.m., and he's not inclined to be back on duty till at least midday. The Fojis had fixed timings, clock in at 8 and out at 4. Unfortunately, the point they never understood was that crime doesn't follow a timetable. When the coup first happened, army officers would show up to monitor the police stations promptly at 8 a.m., expecting to find the in-charges at their desks. Usually no one except the duty officer and the night sentry were present at that hour. Constantine hadn't met the young army captain monitoring his police station until a good 10 days after the takeover. So immediately from these first couple of paragraphs, we already sense tension. There's tension between the police and the army. And we immediately want to know more about that. And then we also are introduced to the very curious figure of Constantine, who's a Pakistani police officer with a Christian name, who wears a cross. And I found Constantine, he's the protagonist of the story. He's a very compelling character. What can you tell us about the real-life inspiration for Constantine?
Constantine wasn't any one individual. I think the character is forged out of several people that I came across in my career. There was a police officer, in fact, I believe he's still posted as an SHO somewhere in Karachi, who is a Christian officer, and he's a very good officer. And I worked with him at one point in my career. And I always thought the interesting bit about that dynamic was, and at one point, in fact, I went to CID, which is the counterterrorism unit, and I asked him that, come along, I'll requisition you and I'll get you posted in CID. And he said, साहब खुदा को माने, वैसे ही मैं क्रिश्चियन हूँ, वो कहेंगे जॉर्ज बुश का चमचा लग गया CID में, तो जिहादी वैसे ही नहीं छोड़ेंगे. And that comment always struck with me because it would be very interesting to see the world from his position, to see our world, the world of the police from his vantage point.
And I think you have that very paragraph or that very phrase later in the book.
I did. I haven't given him a share of my royalties, though, no.
But the book is really, in a way, it is really a tribute to the police. And this is something, again, that we don't hear much of in Pakistani writing. If anything, if the police are ever thought about in literature, they're jokes or they're feared or they're... So you have given a very flip side. And what has been the internal reaction to this portrayal from your fellow officers and from the authorities themselves?
Like I said earlier, I think the police represents a very, very fertile ground to write about. I think that there are stories in the police that need to be told because, and one of the things I've done in the book is I have it's a no holds barred account. Yes, we are not angels. There is corruption in the police. There are bad officers, there are good officers, but the police ultimately is a reflection of the society that it polices. Because that's where we come from. We cannot be isolated like, for instance, the army can. A nation's army can be better than that nation because they are isolated, they're cocooned. The police cannot. Good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, we are what you are. And the thing is that, for me personally, I think the main thing was that it's very important to highlight that within the police there are ordinary people doing extraordinary things on a daily basis. That doesn't always come across. The sacrifices that the police gives as a department doesn't always come across. The fact that, for instance, 180 odd police officers were killed in 2013, that means one every second day. The fact that since in the past 10 years, 500 officers who were involved in the operations in the 1990s have been killed of all ranks, targeted and killed. So I think a big portion for me was to get to somehow sort of make this come out. Whether I've succeeded or not, obviously you or the audience is a better judge of that. But this is what I wanted to highlight.
Well, it certainly comes across, and it is not a completely honeyed, sympathetic portrayal. You have portrayed the police in all their shades.
Yeah, I think it would be unrealistic to have sort of had as you put it, a honeyed portrayal. I think it's much more effective when it's a realistic portrayal.
And one of the things that I like very much about the book is the strength of the characters, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But the plot itself is extremely exciting, and you have this 6-day race against time. The police have until December 25th, Christmas Day, to find the journalist, or else they have received information that that's the end of him. At the same time, you intersperse this with a backstory of an incident that happened a good, 6 or 7 years previous to the main story. And so when you were constructing the plot, how did you keep track of everything? Did you have it all written out beforehand, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, or did you just leave it to chance and see how it would come out as you wrote it?
I think looking back on it, it probably would have been a good idea to have had it written out. I didn't. I wrote it. In fact, it was funny because I wrote one section of the book first and then kind of inserted the second section subsequently.
Oh.
So.
Why did you decide to do that?
It just, it's something that occurred to me later on. So I thought I'd polish it up, I'd change things around.
And was that a surprise to you then when you look back and realized that this had actually happened? Was that?
Yeah, I think when I sort of looked at the final construction of the book, I found that, to my surprise, it worked very well. Having this thing of flashbacks and looking backward and going forward. I certainly didn't intend it that way. It was written in a very disorganized manner.
Well, there's no one right way to write a book, as we know, and your method is as valid. And the product, what it's turned out, shows that your method is quite successful. We'll get back to that backstory because there's something very significant that Omar reveals in this backstory. Those of you that have read the book may know what I'm talking about, but I'm guessing, how many of you have read this book? Let me ask. Okay, so only a few, so I'm not going to give spoilers. But there's something very, very significant in that backstory, which we'll discuss in a minute. I do want to talk about some of the real-life inspiration for some of the characters in the book. Now, besides Constantine, the major figure is the prisoner himself, a man by the name of Akbar Khan. And he is pivotal to the book. He is the person around whom the whole story hinges, because he's kind of the super cop. He runs with what is the saying? He hunts with the hounds and runs with the hares.
Yeah.
And so could you tell us about the real-life inspiration for Akbar Khan?
The biggest the character of Akbar was based on Chaudhry Aslam, who was a colleague of mine. In fact, Aslam and I worked together very closely on a number of assignments over a number of years. And
can I just add that Chaudhry Aslam was assassinated last month in a bombing in Karachi.
And Aslam and I came from very different backgrounds, but we worked well together for a number of years. It seemed to be an equation that always worked well. And, you know, some of the stuff that Aslam had done, as I said, it did inspire the character. And I've tried to kind of put in some of his stories because we would end up swapping stories a lot, sitting late at night in either the police station or his office or my office, waiting for a raid or something like that. But I've tried to bring to light an aspect of the way that he used to work.
Do you think he would have been pleased with this portrayal? Tell me the story that you told me about when you told him that you'd written this book and he's in it.
I called him up I was coming back to Karachi in December, and I called him up and I told him कि यार असलम मैंने तेरे बारे में किताब लिखी है, जा कोई उसको ख़रीद तो सही. And Aslam being Aslam said, हाँ साहब कोई मसला नहीं, अभी 8,000 कॉपियाँ उठा लेते हैं. So I said, हाँ कर उसकी बिक्री करना नहीं है किताब की. And then, unfortunately, he passed away, and we weren't able to really talk about it. But on his funeral, in fact, a lawyer, friend of both of us, came up to me, and he was relating a story that a couple of weeks prior to that, he had gone to see Aslam in his office, and Aslam had a copy of the book, and Aslam was proudly displaying it, and he told this friend of ours that, देख उमर साहब ने मेरे बारे में किताब लिखी है. So the lawyer said, यार तू वैसे ही बकवास करता रहता है. He said, अरे नहीं लिखी है. तो the lawyer said, अच्छा मुझे दे दो. तो he said, नहीं तू जाकर अपनी खरीद, मैंने पैसों की खरीदी है ये. And so Aslam had this friend of ours read the first couple of chapters to him and then narrate it to him, so translate it, and he said, this is what he's writing about now. So he was quite happy with that, according to my friend. He was so happy that then he got up and was walking away with the book, and the lawyer said, यार मेरे पास छोड़ दो, मैं तो पढ़ लूँ. तो he said, नहीं तू जाकर तू ले जाएगा, चोरी कर लेगा मेरी, खुद जाकर अपनी ले.
And when he passed away, you also wrote something very laudatory about him in the Express Tribune, a column about what he was like as a colleague and what his legacy was that you felt you had to pick up and shoulder. And I want to touch upon the fact that when I was reading the book, you portray the police as a sort of a strange contradiction between loyalty amongst officers and then people who will sell each other out for the right price. It's this strange tension all along. And is it really like that? And if so, how did you cope with that in that environment?
Yeah, I think it is, and again, I think it's a department where the normal stresses of any work environment are multiplied 100-fold. So if you have office politics in a normal office, as every office does have, the politics and the stakes within the police are increased 100-fold. And that creates tremendously positive people as well. It creates tremendous people who are tremendously loyal, who sort of stand up for you. And it creates extremely negative people as well.
I think that people who read this book are actually, we already probably think we're very jaded. We know everything there is to know about the state of corruption in the police, but I think people will actually be shocked when they read how you have portrayed it. Was that something you wanted to do? Did you want to shock with the details that you have provided?
I don't think so. Again, as I said, my point was to make as realistic a portrayal as possible. And as I said, whether it's corruption, whether it's threats to police officers, or whatever the aspect of it may be, that's a part of it. We can't run away from it. We can't say that the police is not corrupt, or we can't deny practices that are present.
And you have advocated, you did a talk at the Sin Club last month when you were here to soft launch the book about policing practices and room for improvement. We're not going to get into too much of that right now. But one of the strong points that you made is that the police needs more support in terms of if something happens to a policeman, his family is left unsupported. They have to search high and low for their pension. And you've written very movingly about that in the book. Do you want to add anything to those thoughts or observations?
Yeah, I think, again, as you said, and the point that I've tried to make through fiction in the book is that the circumstances that we find ourselves in today, and I'm speaking here as a police officer, these aren't normal circumstances. I think when, and again, as I said, there are several police officers sitting in this audience. When we joined the police, this was not what we thought the job would be. You know, we face an insurgency, we face a situation, especially in Karachi, which would, you could import the London Metropolitan Police and they would find it as challenging as we do. These are exceptional circumstances in which we've sort of been thrown into it and told to do as best we can. And you know, that needs to change because we aren't equipped for this. And that needs to change on all levels, you know, whether it's operational, whether it's welfare-related issues, or whether it's how we think about things.
And I think that's one of the most moving aspects of the book is these characters, Akbar and Constantine and all the rest of them. And I made a chart of all the characters because they're so interesting, and I also was dying to know who the real-life inspirations were for all of them. This is a fun game to do if you're reading the book. What's so moving is that you write about these men who are ordinary but heroes at the same time. And they throw themselves into risk again and again and again, knowing that if something happens, they can't be protected, that they're likely to not have the support of their higher-ups, of anybody, really. You are also in that situation where you put yourself in the line of fire again and again. What kind of personality does it take to be that crazy?
A messed up one, mostly.
Come on, be serious.
I think, and again, this is it's different for different people, but I think one thing that this job does is that no 2 days are ever the same, and I think that can be addictive to a certain, and I'm not saying this is true of everybody, but I think that certainly can be addictive to a certain type of personality. You know, you can become very easily the sort of person who thrives on the sort of chaos that you find yourself in on a daily basis.
That must wreak havoc on family life, though, and normality and things like that.
You'd have to ask my wife that.
Well, we can do that. We can get her on. No, I'm kidding. But the other strength, there are so many things I love about this book, but the other thing that I absolutely love is the humor. This book is absolutely riddled with some of the driest humor and some of the most insane humor that I have had occasion to read in any piece of writing, Pakistani or otherwise. It's a real tribute to Omar's sense of observation, his eye, his ear for dialogue. I'm just going to read a tiny, tiny paragraph just to give you a sense of how funny this book is. Constantine cursed the Fawjis again, and then he cursed Tom Cruise. This is when he meets the intelligence officer, Colonel Rommel, who's wearing sunglasses and looks very dashing. Constantine cursed the Fawjis again, and then he cursed Tom Cruise for having made that bloody Top Gun movie. Since then, an entire generation of Fawjis had grown up thinking they could be just like him by buying those cheap rip-off sunglasses for 200 rupees from Zainab Market. How important is humor to surviving the police?
I think it's key. I think, you find yourself in situations where you can really only laugh. And I think that you do have to sort of, obviously you have to take yourself seriously, but you also have to see the lighter side of things and the ridiculous side of things at times.
I'm going to read another paragraph that made me laugh and pump my fist at the same time. This is when Akbar is apprehending somebody and taking him into custody. And I love this paragraph. Very impressive, Shashlik. Very impressive indeed. So that's what 5 kokas look like in real life? You're right. We can walk away with the money and pretend we never found you. After all, no one knows we're here. I was almost tempted to accept your offer, but you said all the other cops took your money and forgot where you were. I'm not like other cops. I'm Akbar Khan, and I'm taking you in. So get up off your fat ass and start walking towards the door. Is that how police officers talk?
I think you'll find that that is a heavily edited version that you're reading.
Yes, the galis in this book.
It's a redacted version. As
Oh my goodness, when I was reading this, my ears went absolutely red. And if anyone has spent any time with Omar in casual conversation, this book is very heavily edited to how he is in conversation. But you told me that actually you were kind of worried that the aunties might be upset, but they have actually been rather titillated by all of this. In fact, he describes this as a softer 50 Shades of Grey. So tell us about how the aunties have reacted to your book.
I actually, when I wrote it again, it was not something, I wanted to make it sound as realistic as possible. And so you have a lot of the language that we would use, that you would find in a police station, or that, that we use, or I use at least, quite regularly. And I think...
Do you want to give us an example?
I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing.
We'll save that for later.
But I found, to answer your question, I think what I found interesting was that I had never really paid attention to this aspect of it. And then when people sort of, the first wave of feedback started coming in, people said, it's a great book, but it's a bit X-rated. And I said, really? It doesn't have any sort of sex scenes in it. So unless the publishers put something in, they said, no, it's the language.
There's a couple of scenes there. Okay.
Modest.
Anyway. Yes. Okay.
I think I found a number of people were quite excited by the language. It didn't dissuade them, I have to say, and my thanks to them, but it sort of spurred them on.
Well, Pakistanis are very repressed. I think they're looking for somebody to just come out with everything that they're thinking but don't feel they should say. One of my favorite scenes is when Constantine goes to Akbar Khan's party. Akbar Khan is throwing a very wild party to keep some of his associates happy. And he comes across Akbar Khan in a private room where there are, let's say, 4 fat mullahs lying around on charpais completely drunk. And these people are known to the public as sort of scions of religious life, and yet you expose them for the petty criminals that they are. And these are fictional characters. These ones aren't based on anybody dead or alive, I hope.
No, but I think, again, the premise there is that, especially in a city like Karachi, a lot of things aren't what they seem. And in fact, a police officer has a pretty good vantage point because you see all aspects of society. So you see a cross-section of it, and you see people, a lot of religious leaders, mullahs for that matter, who their sort of garb of religiosity is a cover for their illegal activities. You have religious groups who are doing land grabbing, who are doing kidnapping for ransom in the name of religion or in the name of a party or ideology, but actually it's in the name of money. And I wanted to bring some aspect of that, where it's not as cut and dried as someone being driven by ideological purposes. In Karachi, the name of the game is money.
Yes, that was very eye-opening for me to see that. And that's also why I like this book, because it's full of... What is that? Okay. It's full of these kinds of nuances, which we do not know. And that's why I say that you are the perfect person to have written this book.
That's the mullahs from the book.
All right. They're having a party next door. You are the perfect person to have written this book because you are an insider to the police, to the life of the police, but you also removed yourself and you went away, so you became an outsider of a sort. And you went and got this very, high-powered education, which helped you probably with becoming more literate than your colleagues, I suppose.
I don't know about the education bit, but I think what going away for a bit does do is that it gives you a little bit of perspective. I think when you're on the job, you tend to become you tend to go into a firefighting mode. You're just responding to situations. I think going away for periods of time allows you the introspection to think about things, to think, that happened, what did it mean, what should it mean, and if you want to write, I think that's what helped me in terms of writing, that I was able to get some time to put those thoughts down on paper.
Okay.
They're really having a good party.
They are having a great party. Maybe we should join them after this. Now, I want to go back to the backstory, which, as you said, you wrote afterwards and you put in afterwards. And the backstory involves two politicians by the name of Nawaz and Yusuf Chandio, who are local politicians and Sindhis. And you write about them and how they collide with the police in a very shocking manner, in a very thrilling manner. And the result of which means that Akbar Khan lands up in jail for about 5 years. Was that based on a real life incident?
Yeah, I think, as I said, writing about something as controversial as the Karachi police, it's inevitable that you will draw upon things that, instances that happened, the Daniel Pearl case, or whether it's the presence of political parties or political interference in the police department, or indeed other cases, for instance, the Murtaza Bhutto case. But my intention when writing it was not, I don't go into the political connotations of the case. That there are various opinions as to what happened or whatever. But what I found more interesting was focusing on what happens to these police officers who are caught up in the middle of it.
Right.
So they are then, something happens in the line of duty, and then you are caught up in a vortex where the situation is not in your control anymore. There are political forces that are far beyond you, that are sort of tilting it one way or the other, and it's really interesting to see how a police officer's world turns upside down almost instantaneously.
Were you expecting this book to be as successful as it is? Because it's sold out at least twice already in Karachi. Were you expecting this to happen?
I wasn't, honestly. I mean, I'm not just saying that. I think what I have found surprising is that people I've talked to who've read the book and have praised it or discussed it with me keep saying that, this is stuff that we didn't know happened. And a lot of people who say this are people who have been lifelong residents of Karachi and are very sort of, I would call them well-informed citizens. So I found it very interesting that there is this entire world that seems to run parallel, where a lot of people in the city, a lot of people for that matter, even in the government, are unaware of. But we live in it as police officers.
And at the same time, I don't consider this book an expose. It wasn't written with that in mind.
It wasn't
at all.
written with, no, not at all, no.
Have you been approached by any other publishers to translate this into other languages?
No, I haven't.
But you have been approached by somebody who says they want to make a film out of it.
But they hadn't read the book yet. So
okay.
They thought it would be a good idea to make a film on the police in Pakistan. And I said, why don't you read the book first? You may decide to retract the offer. Absolutely.
Suppose there was an offer, though. Would you write the script for this? Would you write the screenplay?
I don't know. If anyone pays me enough money, sure.
There's usually
but
money
I don't,
involved.
Again, it's something that it would be, I think, more challenging to make it into a screenplay. I think it may touch on a lot of aspects that perhaps may be a little more uncomfortable. It's perhaps easier to write a fiction book on a lot of stuff. So I don't know.
This is a fun question I asked you earlier to think about, but Bollywood comes knocking, and they want to make the movie of The Prisoner. which actors would you choose to play the main characters? Who would be your Constantine? Who would be your Akbar Khan? Would there be Salman Khan? Would there be Irfan Khan?
I'll tell you what I'd do. No, I wouldn't go for any of these Khan ones. They're crap. I would go for good. It's food for thought. I would actually go for a couple of very good character actors. Someone like Nana Patekar or Nawazuddin Siddiqui. But I would put in an item number by Kareena Kapoor. Must. That's what will make the movie a best.
And there's scope for that because the brothels of Karachi also feature very significantly in the story. So who would be your Naika?
Kareena.
Wonderful. And would there be a role for Amitabh? Would he be Dr. Death?
That's food for thought.
All right.
Definitely, yeah.
And what's next in the pipeline? What are you working on now?
I've just wrapped up a second manuscript, so let's see where that goes.
No, you have to tell us what it's about. You can't leave us like that.
It's a little different. I guess and again, as I said, I've literally just finished it, so it may change as we go forward, but that deals with the process of radicalism and how an individual gets, and how an individual who perhaps we could say comes from our sort or our segment of society becomes radicalized.
And you say you've already finished this manuscript.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's really good. I look forward to reading it. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? We're going to open the floor for questions now, but let's have a round of applause for Omar. And we have about 13 minutes. I've left a little extra time for questions because I know there will be a lot. There should be a mic that goes around to the audience members. Please, can we have a mic? Okay, we'll start from the front and work back. So the gentleman in the front here. No, yes, right there. And then you're next, sir, and then we'll just move our way back.
Thank you. I'm Iqbal, I'm a human rights activist. My narrative is different from what you said, that the military is good and the state is bad. But I say if the police is the symbol of the state, and if the police is weak, then the state is weak, and what we are seeing in the whole Pakistan, number one. Number two, historically, police has been underfed, undertrained, and underpaid, where we see that the higher hierarchy of the police, when they are there, the lower segment from the constable and the other people who are working at the police stations, they really bear the brunt of the issue. So it is not the salary of the 7 lakh of the Supreme Court judge that will turn the things around. I think the police is the whole package of the whole criminal justice system. So why there is no need? I think political parties has to make the plea for police reforms. But why the police senior hierarchy is failing to take up this issue while they are in policy making together with the military?
Thank you for that question. And
Iqbal?
can I ask that everybody restrict yourselves to a question only? A question only.
Iqbal Sahib, to answer your first question, I don't, and you'll see this when you read the book, I don't say that the military is good and the police is bad. मैं ये कहता हूँ कि the problem that we all have is that the military can be cocooned. They live in a cocoon. They live in cantonments. Their interaction with society at large can be minimized. अगर एक बंदा फौज में सिपाही भर्ती होता है तो जब तक वो रिटायर करता है, it is possible for him to live in a very systematic environment, and in fact it's necessary because of the requirements of that job that they be cocooned. You cannot cocoon the police because the police has to interact with society on a daily basis and it has to come from that society. So उस society में अगर ऐब हैं या अच्छाइयाँ हैं वो पुलिस में नुमायाँ होंगी उसी तरीके से. Your second question about is absolutely right. The problem is that, and we should all admit this, and I admit it, it's a leadership failure. It is. We have failed. We have not done what we should do to deal with all the issues that you raise. Absolutely. We can sort of dress it up nicely, but let's call a spade a spade. It's our failure.
Gentleman in the third row with the mic.
Well, your book is seems to be a real life story, but in the end, I feel that you try to give a happy end to the entire episode. Is it right?
I wouldn't say it's a happy ending. I won't answer the question in great detail because obviously it may give away the ending of the book. I think it's according to the dynamics that you see throughout the book, that's the appropriate ending. मैं ये कहूँगा.
Irshad Saab, did you have a question? And then the lady in the back with her hand raised, and then the gentleman in the blue. So 3 questions on the way. No. Yeah, we're going to go to the front first, and then the lady in the back, and then the gentleman in the blue. I can't hear you. And do you have a question? I would like to take questions.
Well, no, it's not. It's a
Try to phrase it as a
piece
question.
of information.
Okay.
The first criminal book in Karachi on crime was written by Zulfikar Ghaus. I just thought I'd
Oh,
correct
thank
on
you.
that.
And the title of that?
That's as far as I know,
Okay.
but OUP would be a better.
Okay, thank you.
better informed.
That's good to know. By Zulfikar Ghaus, The Murder of Aziz Khan. Lady in the back with the glasses.
I have a quick question, Omar. How has violence changed you?
How has violence changed you?
I don't know actually, to be honest. I think as a police officer, what tends to happen to us is, and I suppose it's the same, for instance, with surgeons or whatever, that a level of desensitization seeps in. So the first thing that you think of when you hear of a bomb blast or a tragic murder is, अच्छा ये यूं हुआ, खुदकश था या VBID थी या ये था. So you start thinking like an investigator. You start thinking like a police officer. I don't know, and I think it's an absolutely fair comment. And I think, especially with the experiences of the Karachi police over the past couple of decades, it's probably a good idea for all of us to get some sort of counseling sooner or later.
Yeah. Gentleman in the blue.
My thing is, I needed to ask you that if you're going to have this thing published in Urdu, because my bookseller happens to be a small bookshop that has sold all the books in English, but can't we have some books translated into Urdu, because 10,000, 15,000 copies, so,
I have no problem doing it if I haven't been approached by any sort of translation this thing.
yeah, you should start,
बिल्कुल ज़रूर.
Any other questions? On the side here? And then the back.
बहैसियत पुलिस ऑफिसर, आप सीनियर पुलिस ऑफिसर, आप क्या समझते हैं कि रेंजर्स की पिछले लास्ट कुछ अशरों से यहाँ पे मौजूदगी कराची में, जिस तरह उनको सिविल इंतज़ामी मामलात में इन्वॉल्व किया गया है, तो वो क्या इस चीज़ का बायस नहीं बन रही कि मतलब बतदरीज कराची पुलिस की फ़ालियत जो है वो अदम फ़ालियत में बदलती जा रही है और बहुत से मामलात में हम डिपेंड करने लगे हैं रेंजर्स पे और हमेशा पैरामिलिट्री फोर्सेस पे, हालांकि उनका ये काम नहीं है.
देखिए, मैं इसका जवाब देने से पहले ये कहूँगा कि ये मेरा पर्सनल ओपिनियन है. मैं यहाँ हुकूमत को नहीं रिप्रेजेंट कर रहा. जो एक प्रॉब्लम है और जो आज से नहीं, मतलब हमने कराची में ख़ास तौर पर पिछले 20-25 सालों से रेंजर्स की प्रेजेंस देखी है लॉ एंड ऑर्डर के हवाले से. जो इस इशू में, आई होप एनीवन डजंट माइंड मी सॉर्ट ऑफ आंसरिंग इन उर्दू, जो इसमें जो एक मसला है वो ये है दैट the rangers are not fundamentally trained to be a policing force. और उससे मेरा मकसद ये है कि लोग जो पुलिस के दो हिस्से हैं नौकरी के, whether it's one aspect of it is public order maintenance, the other aspect of it is investigation. The rangers have no experience in investigation, and this is why there will always be a requirement for the police, because that aspect of taking a crime from the point of view, from starting from the crime scene to the arrest, prosecution, conviction, all the various levels that you pass through in the criminal justice system, the army or the rangers are not, and they would probably tell you this themselves, that they are always wary of having to go in front of a court. And which is why I think it's a quick fix solution always to say that, things are bad in Karachi, let's hand it over to the rangers or let's hand it over to the army. But the real problem is that until you address these aspects of it, the investigation, the processing things through the criminal justice system, you can't get improvement.
Having read your book, I see that your characters succeed in developing a lot of sympathy for police corruption, especially in lieu of its impact on their retirement. So, aap as a serving police officer, do you anticipate getting into trouble with civil society and your superiors for having developed this thesis?
I don't think it's a thesis. I think, as I said, if you talk about the police without talking about corruption, it's an incomplete thing. Just as if you talk about the police without talking about their heroism, that's also an incomplete narrative. So you have to take the good with the bad.
The lady in the front here, can you stand up so you can grab the mic from him? Thank you. We can't hear you. Could you put the mic close to your face? They need them practically down your throat.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
That's much better.
All right, you said about the last story about those political party murder, that you wanted to portray the consequences of that particular event. So is it goes for all the stories? So is it like goes for all the stories you mentioned in the book? Atik tension, arrest, and then all the other stories you mentioned throughout the book? So was it the consequences you wanted to portray, or it was actual story?
Yeah, I think the two aspects go hand in hand.
The right, and maybe you could just have the mic passed to him. We have time for maybe 2 more questions.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर सर इस वक्त हमारे मुल्क में जितनी है हमारी नौजवान नस्ल कॉलेज यूनिवर्सिटियाँ तमाम जगहों पर मंशियात इस्तेमाल कर रही है, मतलब हमारी नौजवान नस्ल तबाह हो रही है। तो मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाहता हूँ, क्या पुलिस की इजाज़त के बगैर किसी भी इलाके में मंशियात भेजी जा सकती है?
देखें, ये अगर आप अगेन ये किताब के वेरियस सेक्शंस पढ़ें, तो जैसे मैंने उन साहब के सवाल का जवाब दिया कि मैंने इसमें एक बिल्कुल रियलिस्टिक और वाज़े पोर्ट्रेल किया है पुलिस का। उसमें जो आप मेंशन कर रहे हैं, जो उसमें हमारे नेगेटिव पॉइंट्स हैं वो भी हैं, उस पर मैंने किसी किस्म का पर्दा डालने की कोशिश नहीं की, और उसके साथ साथ जो हमारे पॉजिटिव पॉइंट्स हैं वो भी हैं। तो इसमें जो जैसे आपने कहा, आप उसमें पढ़ेंगे, इनफैक्ट मुंशियात का भी उसमें जिक्र है। हाँ, पढ़िए ज़रूर।
This is a very different forum. How has your book been perceived by your colleagues and peers when you go back into your real life?
Will you get in trouble, Omar?
I keep joking that police officers don't really read books, so it's fine. But however, I will say that amongst the current audience, we seem to have an overwhelming representation of police officers, so I may be wrong on that. I don't know how many of them have read the book yet or not. So far, I haven't had much of a reaction from them. Let's see.
I would be very surprised if they were overly negative, because you are advocating for their cause. That's just one observation I'll make. That there could be nobody more sympathetic to them than a
If
fellow.
my next posting is to Dera Bukti, then we'll find out sort of which way they decide to take, what they decide to do about this.
We've got time for one last question. Anybody? Any brave soul? Over here on the side. Over there, right. I have to athletically grab the microphone.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you comment on the loss of confidence, the loss of self-esteem that police officers face of having to bow down to someone and bowing down to someone out of political reasons or...
Sorry, could you repeat the question? We couldn't quite... Yeah, अगर आप थोड़े करीब आ जाएं, उस तरह पूछ लें.
We've seen that sometimes police officers, they have to abandon their duty, so to speak, out of political concerns. They have to bow down to a Bado Manu. So can you comment on that? That loss of self-esteem that they might face, a grown man having to act like a servant?
Yeah, I think, again, unfortunately, in our sort of context that we are in, this is a problem. It's a problem, as I said, the issue, and I've written about it in the book, the issue of the politicization or political interference in the police. It is, and again, I think to answer your question, I think everyone, as a police officer, it's a personal choice that you make. So I can't answer for everyone else. The officers who've come before me, the officers who will come after me, this is a choice that everyone will make on a very personal level, whether they do this or they don't do it, and how it impacts them.
I want to thank you, Omar, for coming. You make us very, very proud. Thank you all for a super session, for fantastic questions, and your presence.